Hello, hello, hello. Can you all hear me okay? I think that's all good. Good morning, welcome to week 7. How's everyone going? How many people are here? Let's see. Let's look at the statistics. We all made it through iteration 2. Survived. Oh god, what is happening with this window? Okay, 40 people. Not bad. Oh, climbing. That's good. So how was iteration 2? Solid 13. Don't know what that means. I know a lot of you were up really late on Sunday and over the weekend. We're doing a lot of work for this. 13. No, it's more than that. It's probably still catching up. I think you all did really, really well. I was having a quick look at some of the early results from the auto marking, and I think there's a few groups that maybe panic pushed some code that sort of broke. So we'll work with you to fix those up and get them rerun and things for the marks. But then there were a lot of groups that just had amazing scores. I saw one group with a solid 100 across all of it, which is just amazing. Coverage, PyTest, everything was 100. So if that was one of you, congratulations. But a lot of groups in the 90s, a lot of groups a bit lower, but again, we'll work with you to, if it's a quick fix, we can fix it up with a small penalty, rerun it and bump your score up. So I think that'll happen a lot over the next week. I just wanted to say congratulations. I know it's a lot of work. And I know you've got other courses and things going on, and you might think like, yeah, we're really pushing it, but you really will learn a lot from this course. I think hopefully you're all realizing that anyway. When you go out into industry and you start working, I think you'll realize how much we sort of exposed you to. And you've got hopefully up to 5 people in your group. Exactly right, Penjay. Anyway, I just wanted to say I was really impressed. I think you all did an amazing job. I was looking at some of the teams that you guys used to communicate, and the communication and the planning in some of the groups was amazing. Good job. One more iteration to go. You're all doing amazing. So I just wanted to say that. 1 second, I gotta just again put my... Okay, I always forget to do that. So today we're talking all about requirements. Anyone watch the Oscars yesterday? I was like, how can I upstage the Will Smith performance? But we're not going to be able to, talking about requirements. But I'm really excited for today's lecture. Requirements is... I don't know what you guys think about it sort of intrinsically. I know you haven't maybe been exposed to it formally yet. A lot of people, I think, feel like it's just boring or it's not my problem. I want to be an engineer. Someone else can deal with that. What are people's tell me your general sort of dispositions towards this whole early part of the software development lifecycle, the requirements analysis, the requirements engineering, the requirements gathering. What do people's gut feel about it, even though I know we haven't spoken about it yet? Yeah, I can't believe it. I thought he was a nice guy, Will Smith. I mean, I guess nice guys can have bad days, but shocking. I also I was sure it was fake. Like it was just a written bit until like at the last few minutes. I was like, oh, I think this is real. So. So, rock brick requirements needs to be done for a successful project. I just don't want to be the person doing it. I mean, at least you know it's important, right? Some engineers I think think that it's not important. That the important part is the building, and maybe some of you listening to this think that too. And I want to say that I think you're wrong. In my experience, It's the requirements analysis that's the most important part, because otherwise we don't know what we're building. And even if we know if we have an idea of what we should be building, we don't know if it's what the customer, the client, or the user actually wants. So I think requirements analysis is one of the most important parts. Sienna's asked, are the PDF slides available? They should be. Are they in the repo? If they're not in the repo, I mean, I should be able to make them available, but I don't really think that you'll need to jot notes on these slides. Maybe you can just take notes on a notepad or on a Notion or something. Really, what I'm going to do in this lecture, I was thinking about the way I was going to approach it. And I think what I'm going to do is just go through the slides, break down the information on the slides, and then just talk about my experiences in industry on client-backed projects, or projects that have clients that we interacted with, and talk about what I have seen. And not that I have the most experience, or that I've seen everything, or that I've done this for 20 years, but just to give my perspective on, my isolated experiences on these things. Talk about little stories and let you guys know what I faced, because it's likely that you will face some of these things too, and then we'll just look at resources for certain things and just discuss them. Requirements are important because if you read them properly, then you won't miss easy marks for your iteration. I mean, that's a good point. So you've been consuming requirements documents for COMP1531, but you haven't really been generating anything yourself. Okay. This is a bit too wide, I think. There we go. Alrighty. So again, we think the most important part of building a system is figuring out what you need to build. And this number, I've dropped it a few times in this course, the 50% of projects fail. I would posit that most of these failures occur because of or in the requirement stage. So it's not that the developers on a project can't build something or don't know what to build or built the wrong thing. They might have built the wrong thing, but it's not because they're bad developers or didn't know what they were building. It's because they didn't understand what the client's problems were, what the user's problems were, and they built the wrong solution successfully. Like they successfully built the wrong solution. And so requirements is basically an activity, a part of the software development lifecycle that's all about trying to elicit from your user what they actually need to build. And it's complicated. It's not an easy activity. One of the reasons it's not easy is because users often don't know how to put into words the problems that they're facing. Users, especially non-technical users, which is majority of projects, right? It's not often that you write software, that you engage in software projects for technical users. It happens, I've done it before. If you're building an internal tool or something like that, that might be a bit easier because you're building a tool for engineers who understand what's possible, what's not possible, how to put into words what they want. What's more complicated is when you're building software or you're building a project for users that, are just out and doing their own thing, and they don't understand computing, they don't understand engineering, and so they don't really know what's possible, what they want, and so they might give you the wrong information. I mean, a classic example of this also is, I know this is a bit of a meme, but the what's his name? Ford, the guy that invented the car. He said if he had have asked his customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, not a car, because they wouldn't have been able to imagine a car, right? And so the point of that anecdote is that sometimes what your users say they want isn't what they actually want. And I think this is something that Steve Jobs was really good at, right? He would often, Apple would often reveal something that people would think is stupid and no one would ever want that. I think the original iPad was an example. People said it was stupid and now it's successful. It's an industry in its own, just the iPad space. So it's a complicated activity. Where does it take place? Regardless if you're in a waterfall model, which probably most of you will never work in a project on, fortunately or unfortunately. Or if you're in an agile project model, requirements analysis is the first thing that happens in the software development lifecycle. So you come, a client comes to your team, or your team approaches a client, and you say to them, or they say to you, we want to build this project, and you shake your hands and you write up a contract, and then you say, okay, well, we need to figure out, what do you want? What do you want us to build? And so the requirements analysis, depending on the scope of the project, can take a long while, and it's the first thing that happens before you design a system, develop it, test it, etc. You do the requirements analysis stage. The formal definition, as governed to us by our overlords, the IEEE, define requirements as a conditional capability needed by a user to solve a problem or achieve an objective. So it's an agreement between the software development firm and the client on what work needs to be completed, and that goes both ways. So it's not just that the engineers need to complete things, it's that the client needs to show up to meetings, to produce data. So I worked on a system once where we were, this was not even when I was working for a software company. I think I was still an undergrad, and I just, a friend of a friend was had a small business, and they had a really complex, MYOB, the accounting software. What was happening? They used to export everything to spreadsheets, and then they would spend literally 2 weeks doing these tax calculations. And then they had the idea that, we can this is all something that can be automated, but they didn't know how to solve it. So I went and helped them out. And but part of that, engaging with them, I needed the existing spreadsheets that they were using to do the calculations, right? And so that was something that they had to bring to the table. I couldn't do that. I needed to see exactly what they're doing, because they might tell me, we wanted to calculate this and we were using this formula. And then I look at their spreadsheet and I think, hold on, you were never using that formula. Maybe you were 5 years ago, but that's not what you're actually doing now. How am I meant to solve a problem without knowing what you were actually doing, right? So this is where requirements analysis is not the engineering team or the requirements team or the design team doing a bunch of work isolated. It's an agreement, it's working together with the client producing what they're currently doing or what the current problem is, and the engineering team trying to understand it. And it's also describing the constraints of the proposed system. So what does it need to do, what does it not to do? Here's another quote: the single hardest part of building a software system is deciding what to build. No part of the work so cripples the resulting system if it's done wrong. If you use the wrong Python library to build your API and it's 5% slower than Flask, that's not going to cripple your project, right? Because you can just, it'll work well, maybe it won't scale, and you'll rebuild it and you'll be happy. But if you build the wrong API, you're screwed, then the client hates you and you don't get the next project from them. So what are some examples of requirements? Can we come up with some requirements that are set out by the COMP1531 course? And actually, so there are two, here we are. So before we do that, let's do that together. But there are two types of requirements, functional and non-functional requirements. Functional requirements specify a capability or service that the system should provide. It's what the system does. Functional requirements are like your technical requirements. What the system does. Non-functional requirements place a constraint on how the system achieves that. And it could be something like a performance characteristic. So a functional requirement could be that I need to apply this particular formula to some data to get a result. A non-functional requirement could be that I want it to happen in one click. Does that make sense? It's not exactly what's happening, but it's how the user might interact with it, or the overall experience about it. So knowing those two facts, let's come up with some requirements of 1531. I mean, this shouldn't be too hard because we actually sort of tell you a lot of the requirements you have in the course. But can we just come up with some in the chat and then I'll read them? And And then, and try and come up if they're non-functional or if they're functional as well. That would be good. But maybe I can start us off if we're quiet. Just fixing. Come on. You just want to keep talking about Will Smith and the Oscars. Well, I can give you one. Okay. I can give you a non-functional requirement. A non-functional requirement of 1531 is that you need to do the project in a group, right? You have a group project. That's a non-functional requirement. Because it doesn't matter what you're building. It doesn't matter what we get you to learn, to create, to study. We want you to do it in a group. That's describing what you're doing. And the reason we have that requirement is because we want you to learn some of the tools like Git, for example, but also just the experiences of working in a group. So that's an example of a non-functional requirement in 1531. High distinction is a functional requirement. Maybe that's a personal requirement of yours. The libraries we can use, that would be a requirement, absolutely. The ability to use Python, that's like a learning outcome, I would say. Maybe the requirement would be to use Python, I suppose. You want to use API requests for iteration 2. Yeah, exactly. So, or, just that you need to build the Scenes app. I mean, that is a functional requirement. And that spec we give you is a functional requirement as well. Exactly, how you store the data, yeah. So here's some examples here. The system must send a notification to all users whenever there's a new post or someone comments on an existing post. So that's like a forum software, for example. That's a functional requirement. It describes one of the functions of the system. A non-functional requirement must be that the system must send the email no later than 30 minutes after the activity. So for example, on WebCMS, when I make the announcement, I type the announcement, I click send, it takes like 5 minutes for it to get sent out to everyone. But the fact that I can send that out would be a functional requirement of the system. The time delay, the maximum that I'm willing to wait would be a non-functional requirement. So what are some of the processes we use to elicit these requirements or derive the requirements? And this is what we call the term requirements engineering, or it's the process of building out the requirements. So to get your requirements, we go through the activities falling under requirements engineering, which is elicitation, analysis, specification, and validation. Is this going to take us through each of them? Yes, it is. Okay, cool. So we'll go through each of these four steps. So the overarching activity, requirements engineering, is a set of activities, the 4 activities that we showed you in the diagram in our case, focus on identifying the purpose and goals of the software system. And it's a negotiation. It's a back and forth. It's many times the client will say, well, we want our system to do this, and we might have to come back and say, look, that might be a good requirement in 2 years' time when we've already got this system running and we know it's working and it's, but that might take 6 months for us to build. Let's pause on that for now. And then they might say, oh, but we want this one part. Okay, so you can see requirements analysis and engineering is a negotiation. And depending on the scope of your system, how big the system is, it's about consulting all the stakeholders, which is just a term for anyone that's impacted by the system. So for example, the client, oftentimes, right, you're building a project for a client. The users aren't the client, right? The client might be a company that sell a product to users, but you're not meeting with the users directly. So part of the requirements engineering might be either the client or preferably the engineering team, the company that's building the software system, goes out themselves and meets the users. That's what you really want to do. The users are kind of the bread and butter. They're the people that actually will use the system. The client might not actually understand what the users want from your system. So that's what we mean by consulting all the stakeholders. So like we mentioned, elicitation of the raw requirements from the stakeholders, analysis of those requirements, formal specification of the requirements, and then validating these requirements. So elicitation, here we go. How do we elicit the requirements from the users? And if you look at all these things here, we say interviewing the stakeholders and things like that, but really what's interesting, I think, in this case is that the client is not the users. I think that's one of the things that, I don't know, maybe it's obvious to all of you. You can let me know. But so I'm trying to think if I can say the name of this client. Anyway, I worked on a project with a well-known company that you wouldn't maybe expect, but you've probably heard of them. And they wanted to build an app for their users. So they were a non-technical company, right? They made some food products. And they wanted to build this health app. And they were telling us all the things they wanted this health app to do. And as part of the requirements elicitation, we went out to the users and we said, okay, if you had an app like this, what are some of the things you'd want it to do? What are some of the things you already get done? And basically all of the users, all that we kept getting from them was that we don't really care about it. And long story short, I think the project finished. I don't know if it went well, but the client just wanted a product to tick some box, right, in their shareholder meeting. And it was a good example of what the client saying they wanted, not aligning with what their actual users wanted. So how do you figure out what users actually want? So market research. So you can pay market research industries. So there's companies that you will tell them, I want to survey joggers that run more than 3 kilometers a day to see what they think about this app, for example. And so they will go out and they will find these people that meet the requirements of the people you want to interview, and they'll do the market research. Or they will just figure out, for example, how many people jog more than 3 kilometers a day who are women under 30. That's market research. How big is the market? Is there a point in even putting the money down to build this system? And then you can interview those people that you can identify. You could do this yourself, which is, probably a nice way. If you know your users, you just go out to them and you say, look, we're building this app. We made some mock-ups of what we think it might look like. Do you mind running through it and giving us your thoughts? Or giving them an interview or things like that. You can do focus groups, which is when you get a group of these users, you bring them into a room. You could bring them, that's why you have your fancy offices in your office, in your company, and you bring them in, and you might put up on the projector or something the design of an app or a quick prototype or something like that, or the existing thing that they're already doing, and you say, what are the problems? What are you facing? What's something you wish you could do that you can't do? What would make you switch over from this other product? That's a focus group. And it doesn't really matter what you're doing, but you always want to be asking questions. You want to be understanding what the users are doing and why they're doing it. Luke asks a great question. Should we mainly prioritize the clients over the users since they're hiring us? And I think, it's a hard question. But I think the natural tendency is to prioritize the clients. And I think that's why a lot of these projects fail. But it all depends on the situation. Sometimes the client is the user, in which case this is sort of a defunct discussion, right? If you're just building a tool for a client and that client's going to be the people, using the tool themselves, it's not like they're selling it onwards. That's different. But in most cases, it all depends on the type of place that you're working at. If you're working at a place like Canva, right, where you are the engineer and your users are your users, then you don't really have a client. Does that make sense? Your users are your client, and you want to prioritize them. So that's sort of simple. But if you're working for a software firm that does projects for a client on behalf of other users, which is just naturally what I did a bit because we were a sort of research-based development firm, then I think the key is that you need to prioritize the users. Even if the client thinks you're wrong, there's this one project I keep coming back to where the client was just like, no, you're not getting it. But we felt like, no, you're not getting it. You're rushing to build this app, but you haven't actually thought about whether or not we're actually getting the things we want from the users out of building this. I can't remember how the project ended up, but I don't think it went very well. So I think, you need to make the client happy, but you need to focus on the user. And you need to keep telling the client that it's okay. What you want, I get it, but it's what the users want that most important, because they're the ones that are going to pay you at the end of the day, and you pay us. Okay, so you've elicited some requirements, you've met with your users, you've figured out their problem, what they want to do, you start, formally documenting and building your requirements. So identifying dependencies. So that might be, for example, well, we can't build, so let's say you're building a machine learning model. We can't build the model without the training data that comes from the client, right? So that's a dependency. So you need to make sure that you get the data by this date before you can start building the project. Conflicts and risks. What's the likelihood that the client's going to just, leave and cancel the project? Or what's the likelihood that the data that we were waiting on is actually so messy that we can't use it in our machine learning model? Things like that. Establishing priorities. So what's the most important thing we need to do? Again, in this example, it might be getting the data and cleaning the data and making sure that it's sufficient for inference and training and things like that. So there's no point building the user interface of our app if we can't actually get the data and the data is not good enough to build a model. So that's all about identifying your highest risk activities that cost the least amount of effort and time and money, and doing this first to make sure that things will go on. So usually these things are done in stages. So you can use user stories as well. User stories are a great way of creating a document after you've elicited your requirements, but creating a document that identifies what a particular type of user wants. We're going to be talking about those today, and I'll show you some examples. And then we have use cases, which we'll discuss next week. So once you've documented, so I think the user stories are in the next lecture, but it's today, so at like 12 o'clock. If not, I'll get it up. So now you've created some documents, but they're a bit scattered. So you've got maybe some user stories, some descriptions and things like that. Then it's all about creating the specification. So you can sort of imagine now that this is like the stage where we create the specification that you followed for iterations 1, 2, and we'll follow for 3. And it's about creating the actual requirements and the functional and non-functional requirements. The question here then becomes, well, how granular should these be? The technical specification you followed in the projects is very granular. The reason for that is simple, because we want it to work with, our front end and our auto testing. And also we want, this isn't really a design course. It's a collaborative engineering course. So it's not like, can you come up with the design of the system? It's more like, can you follow the spec and adhere to the system? So that's an example of a fairly granular specification. I mean, we told you everything. The name of the data that comes in, the way it comes in, if it's a post, if it's a get, whatever, how it gets returned, the name of the methods. We sort of tell you a lot. You might not always go into that detail. It depends on the scope of the project, how many engineers are working on the project, how many different teams are working on the project. Often this is when you break out your requirements that you gathered into functional and non-functional requirements. So I don't think we gave many non-functional requirements in the project spec, for example. They were mostly functional. We never said that, this function needs to return. I mean, you don't really do this, but this function needs to return in X milliseconds or X seconds or something like that. But you want to try and get there to be enough. You want to have the concrete details here. So here's an example. The system shall keep the door locked at all times unless instructed otherwise by an authorized user. When the lock is disarmed, a countdown shall be initiated, at the end of which the lock shall be automatically armed if it's still disarmed. So it's really like, can I give something to my engineers who are building the system that fully encapsulates and contains everything that they need to know about building the system? What you don't want, so everything I say is a bit of a caveat. What you want, ideally, is that I give an engineer who's never met the users, who's never met the client, because you can't have every single engineer go off and, meet the users and the clients. That doesn't really scale. Your engineers are busy working on your previous project or something like that. So you want to be able to give them a package that really contains and outlines everything that they need to do. The caveat to that is that this is always cyclical. So you can give your engineer this requirement, they can go off and build it, then you show the user what you built, a prototype, right? And they say, oh no, the countdown shouldn't be, I need to see the countdown on the door. You said there's a countdown, I like that there's a countdown, but why can't I see it? It needs to be shown, I don't know, I'm making up an example. So then you need to iterate. So that would be an argument that maybe this requirement statement wasn't specific enough because it didn't say details about the countdown. But maybe the client never told us and they just assumed. So this is where there's always a negotiation, a back and forth with them. But the classic thing you'll come across is that engineers think that their clients don't know what they want. They don't know what they're doing. Most clients are bad clients. In my experience, it's kind of true. It's not common to come across clients that, there's a lot to... This is something that always happens with engineers and computing and programming. We know, and as you guys are getting trained, you're already appreciating this, is that we know a lot of things about what's possible and what's not possible and how things work. And non-technical clients and users don't have that mental model. So they might ask for crazy things like, I want, some AI system that's going to be perfect at doing X. They're not trained to know why that might not be possible. It's our job to negotiate with them. So now, once you've done this, you have to validate. And this is what I was just talking about. Really, I just spoke ahead. So you build this prototype of your door. It follows everything you've said. It follows everything the client told us. We wrote our user stories. We build the door, and then they say, why can't I see the countdown? Okay, so I've tried to validate my requirement statement, and it's not validated because the client had some assumption that we didn't know about. The argument to this, let's say you would then fix the door, add the feature, show it back, and then they're happy. One of the arguments you could make here is that, well, you should have gone out to where they're using their existing door lock thing and seen that they had a countdown on the lockout. So it could be something that you could have done. And you can imagine how much time and money and budget that would have saved if you'd have spent one day getting a couple of people out to the site to see their current solution. Does that sort of make sense to everyone? I know I'm sort of talking a lot, and that's just the nature of these topics, but let me know what you're thinking. Hello? Are you guys still... Am I talking to anyone? Is anyone here? Okay, yep, cool. Zach says, I get it. I still want to make something for the user over the client, but I reluctant. I still want to make something for the user over the client, but I reluctantly get it. I don't really understand. I think you mean like you want to work for a place that makes something for users over clients? Is that what you mean, Zach? Are there any clients that aren't stupid? There are some. I mean, there are some that have done, many projects before, and they just get it, but they're probably few. So, and they're probably, the best clients are existing clients that you've already worked with before. They get to know you, you get to know them. And so, you're happy, but... Okay, everyone's still here. Good. There's a lot of weird emojis. So Zach, yeah, basically. Yeah, so I mean, in many ways, right, if you're working for a company that's making a product for for users directly, your job is a fair bit, well, it's harder in some sense, but it's easier because you have sort of full contact with your users. And you have all the other benefit you have is you've got all the data. So, like, I know, for example, I won't say the name again, but a sort of popular product company, so a software company that make an app for users. It's all about the data. So it's like, where should we put our effort in building the app? Well, 90% of our users use the search feature, not the lookup feature. Like, so they don't go through the menu and say like, I want to find this, I want to find this, I want to find this. They just search it, right? So where should you put your development effort? What should you make better? What should you put your time into? Like, put it into the search feature. So that's one of the benefits you get from having sort of the full control over the scope. But even if you are in that case, Zach, I would argue that you still have a client and users. It's just that the client is your own company. I mean, you can think of many examples where a product company ruined their own product. They didn't have a client that was intermediate between themselves and the user, but they themselves are just the entity. You're an engineer working for a client. It just happens to be that the client is the people that employ you. And the people in that company get the wrong idea about what the users want. That happens all the time. Can you guys think of I'm trying to think of an example, but what's an example of a company just ruining their own product or building the wrong thing? Maybe I know the Zune is like a common one. Microsoft put heaps of money into building that audio player. Completely didn't work. Microsoft didn't have a client. Yeah, the HomePod's a great example. The HomePod's great. It was too expensive. Siri sucks. I still think Siri completely sucks. I use an iPhone, but I used to use a Pixel, and sometimes I still wish. Like, iPhone does a lot of things that I think are a lot better, but Siri sucks. And then they made a device that was like Siri on a device, and it was expensive, and the audio quality was fantastic. But I don't know, they discontinued it after, a year or something like that? YouTube removing dislikes, absolutely. I'm sure there were many documents at YouTube for why they needed to do it. I don't know exactly what the reason was. The next step in corporatizing YouTube, I suppose. But it's another, people don't like it. Google Stadia is another great example. I don't know what they were doing with that. That's a good point. I don't know what Google... Yeah, it was really cool. I was really amped up when they announced Stadia. And then they shut down the game development department months later. So these are all great examples. Fire Phone, I remember, was that the Linux-based phone, I think? Google Glass was an interesting one. Google Glass, that comes up all the time, Julia. I actually disagree with that one. I think in that case, Google pivoted from a user product to a business to business product. I think they just realized that maybe it was a failure a little bit in the design, and then they were like, hold on, no, there is something salvageable here, let's pivot. So it is a good example, but I think it's also an example of doing a good thing with the product. They didn't just kill it, right? Google Glass is still out there. I've used it. In our last company, we had a project for a warehouse business, and they wanted an app on the Google Glass that could I think it was to help the warehouse employees find routes in between the massive warehouse. So it's an example. I do turn Siri off, absolutely. Just stop dislike bombs on advertisements. Well, why couldn't they just turn dislikes off only for advertisements and not for videos? But it's good now. No one can see how many of you dislike my lectures. So maybe I was the one that pushed the YouTube. I was fine. I spoke to YouTube and I thought, get rid of it. I don't want everyone thinking. I'm joking. None of you dislike my videos. Well, actually, I get the now and again you get one. But okay. Anyway, don't dislike bomb this one. It'll make me feel sad. The Ouya was a classic. That was just like a scam. Some of these are Some of these are funny. Xbox Live requiring payment for internet, then followed by PSN and Nintendo. I mean, don't confuse maybe shady practices that are good business decisions with failed projects. Because Xbox Live is a very successful project that's made Xbox a lot of money. So that's the other thing. I mean, this is where you're getting it now. It's really complicated. That's just maliciousness. Do you mean Xbox? Yeah, it could be malicious, but it could be a good business decision, right? It could be both at the same time. Yeah, it's just scummy. Yeah, that's right. And then PSN followed, unfortunately. Sad, but it is what it is. But yeah, these are great examples where, again, what kicked off this discussion was that just because you don't have a client sitting between your users and yourself, it doesn't mean you can't fail. I think the way to think about it is that you do have a client. The client is just your employer, because you're a big entity, right? With lots of different people, and you might not be the person that speaks to the user themselves. So there's always that translation layer where things can go wrong. Or you're just not reaching out to your users appropriately. Okay, people are really upset about Xbox Live. You didn't need to spend money on a 3DS to use the internet, but now got to fork out cash use a feature we always have. Yeah, I agree. But that's how it happens. All right, I think there's only a couple slides here. Okay, what are some of the challenges? Awesome. We can. I'll finish. I literally think this is the last slide, and then we'll come back to chatting about this stuff because it's interesting. I think. So, what are some of the challenges we face when engineering, when engaging in requirements engineering? So, this is a big one. This is a big one. I really like this point. This sort of the door example sort of aligns here, but I think it's bigger than that. So we only understand the requirements after we've started building something. And this is really bad. Why is this bad? So, because you could argue it's good that you figured out the requirements. But why is this a problem? And then I want to talk about some of the things that you're saying. Yeah, exactly. You've already put too much money into building the wrong thing. You've failed. That's money that needs to go to people's salary or to R&D, and you've got to throw it all out. Now, sometimes that's a necessary part of the learning experience. Sometimes it's just big waste of money, and it depends really how far into the development you are, the worse it is, right? This is one that we've been saying, your clients or your customers, right? It doesn't matter which one. They just don't know what they want. This is the classic, the Ford example. If I had have asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. It's a funny meme that's overused, but I think it's really, really, and it's a real quote, I think. But it's a good example. It's like, sometimes users can't imagine what they want, the next best feature. Or sometimes they just literally think they want A, but they really want B, and they just never thought about it properly. They change their mind. They use another product that's even better, and now what you're using is no longer as important. This is another really good one. You can meet with your client. Your client tells you what... I can give you an example of when this happened to me, actually. So again, early on, before I was working sort of for a company, I was actually, so this one was weird. So a friend of mine in undergrad, this company that made telephone, I can't remember, like telephone switching software. So basically, they made software that when you call a department that can route the call to many different departments, they use a computer system to, forward on the calls or manage it all, put people on hold, but lots of lines, right? I don't know if that's making any sense. And they came to the university I was at, and they had a competition for users to redesign their system, their app. It was an old system. And so, like, me and a friend of mine, we designed a new design of the app. And it was a really, I think I've still got the design somewhere, but maybe I'll try and find them one day. But it was a really complex, the UI was crazy. I mean, there were blinking lights everywhere. There was like 200, not 200, there was like 100 buttons on the app. It was a mess. And when we were redesigning, we won the redesign, by the way. So we put together this thing. It was just design. There was no coding. And then the idea was that they would then take that design, work with us to tweak it. We got paid, and they would build the development team would build the app with the redesign. But when we were like doing the redesign, we were like, this app is so complicated. Look at all the best user interfaces we like and we use. They're simple, right? They're one button to do a lot of things. They're intuitive. These are the values that I have still in the products that I make. So we tried to make it simple. And then the client, and I think the client was right, but the client was like, no, this isn't an app. This is after we won, we're working with them. This isn't an app for users. For your normal users. This is a specialized technical tool for, trained people in this particular job. And they need those 100 buttons. They want them. They want the granularity. And this is an example where we didn't understand that this isn't an app that, my family members could pick up and start routing these calls. I mean, we were wrong. We weren't thinking about it the right way. We didn't understand that the terms in the app were very specific and people were trained that way to use it. So this is an example where you might be wrong as well because maybe you didn't respect your client enough or the users enough to understand what they actually do need or what their experience is and things like that. So this is all gray, blurry lines, and it's case by case, and you only really get good at this stuff with experience. Another classic one, limited access to stakeholders. This happens all the time. A client comes to you, or you're working on a team. You're in an engineering team, and you say to your boss, or you say to the client, "Can we do some surveys? Can we observe how people use the feature, blah, blah," and they just say, no, we know what they want, here it is, and it's wrong, because you just weren't given it. This one's a frustrating one. Because, like I said, one day in the field can save you weeks, maybe months of development time. And another one, jumping into the solution too early. This is a classic done by new developers, new engineers, maybe people like yourselves. You know all this now, so maybe you'll be more cautious. But you come out of a degree, you get it. Maybe you do an internship, you get your first full-time position, and you meet with some users, you meet with a client, and then they tell you the briefest description of the problem, and then you're like, yeah, I know how to build that. I studied 1531. I know how to write an API. We just need an API, and the API will just do this, and then you can just call it with the front end. And then you go off and build it, and it was, you didn't go through the requirements analysis. So these are some really, I agree, these are all really common ones. So you got to keep this all in mind when you're, flourishing off an industry, and you got to watch out for other people that you work with that makes them fall into these traps. That's also, and you could say to people, "Oh, actually, hold on. Are we really sure this is what people want? Should we ask them? Should we do this? Should we do that?" Yeah. Cool. So did you want to, what's the chat got here? Air tags? Yeah, I don't know about those. I don't have any. I don't know. That's what I wanted to say. That's right. So you guys are bringing up examples where this is where things are complicated. So one of you said in the chat that AirTags is a failed product, and then someone else was like, no, my sister uses it to track her dog. This is an example where not all users are the same. There's many different groups and cohorts and sections of stakeholders and users. And this is where you have to be thorough. So you can't just get in 3 people. Maybe if there's only 20 people that are going to use your app, 5 isn't enough. That's, 25% of the user base. But if you're making an app for thousands of users, you can't ask 5 people. It might not be enough. You might have to ask 100. A lot of systems are made for many thousands, millions of people. And that's where it doesn't really scale. So you start looking at things like data and statistics to build the particular feature. So maybe YouTube just found that if a video had a lot of dislikes, less people watched it and they made less money. So you got to be separating failed user requirements from business decisions. Connects can actually read body movement pretty well. It's just that a lot of the software use it very inefficiently. Yeah, I think I also worked on a project that used a Connect sensor at some point. But yeah, so when you're such a unique user that exploding Samsung notes are catered to a use case. Good one. Yep. I don't know what that user needs it for. Maybe a very dramatic person that wants a distraction. The Connect is another good one. I don't know if the Connect was a failure. They didn't continue it, so I guess you could argue that. But I think it made them a fair bit of money. But I know it definitely had its problems. It was pretty cool tech, though. Pretty cool tech. But cool tech does not make a good product. Any questions on some of these, I think, concepts or things that we discussed in this lecture so far? Feel free to post them up. I'm going to get I got to do it here. While you do that, I'm going to get the feedback form. Yeah, you can do cool things with the Connect. Okay, lecture feedback. Share, QR code, download, sure, click that. Oh. There we go. Let's see, what are the last? I think I read all these. Oh, the last feedback was, I really enjoyed the lectures for this subject. Thank you so much, whoever said this. That's really sweet. You're all very kind, actually. Okay, feedback form there. All right, the Wii U, yeah, that one, yeah, that was a shame. You know what's crazy to me, actually, on this? So the Wii U, and then the Switch, I think like they use the exact same CPU, which is just nuts to me. I don't know why. I don't get it. Obviously, they know what they're doing. The Switch is one of the most successful consoles, and so is the Wii. I don't know why they don't just put like a better chip in it, right? I don't know. Maybe it's cheap. Can you put a whiteboard on there that doesn't like it? Ooh. Yeah. Is that better? Contract? I can't imagine that like they were like, yeah, we're gonna have this many million. Like maybe, but I feel like I don't know. They sort of made a decision that they wanted to reuse it. I don't think they would know, if the Wii didn't do well, I don't think they would have reused it. Yeah, the Switch is literally a Wii. Like, it's amazing how far they push, how far they push their engine and stuff. I think it goes to show how important software optimization is. But the other downside to it is that I haven't seen, other than their in-house game, like Breath of the Wild looks amazing. I don't know how they pull that off. But other than that, I'm failing to see other good examples because not every, game developer is going to optimize as well as Nintendo's going to. So the Nintendo first party games look amazing, but some of the other ones are starting to look quite dated for a new console. But then maybe, I don't know. Still a very successful console. Okay, is the QR code working? 38, yeah, it's working. Cool. I should not read these in case they're negative and then I'll feel sad. Okay, good. That one was good. Cool. All right. I'm joking, by the way. Please leave all feedback. Okay, Switch is just the Wii and the DS merge. Yep. Flashbacks to SWSH. I don't know what that is. SW software. No, what is that? Nintendo's exclusives are way better than Sony Xbox. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Do we want to take a 5-minute break, stretch, water? I'm going to make a coffee, and then we're coming to talk about user stories, I think. Yeah, so Pokemon Sword and Shield, I don't know, they shit me. They all sucked, I think. I don't know, maybe I'm getting nasty. They were fine. I didn't play the new ones. I don't have a Switch anymore. But they didn't even look that good. I just wish the Breath of the Wild engine ran the new Pokemon games. My Switch heats up like it's about to detonate soon. You guys would be good. You guys would be entertaining user, focus groups. I want a console that doesn't heat up and like it's going to explode. You know what I played on the Switch the most when I had one was just Tetris 99. I loved Tetris 99. It was so good. That was fun. Yeah, I want to play Arceus, but I don't have a Switch. No, there's no coding for these lectures. No. So I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing, but maybe it's a bit of a break after iteration 2. Tetris 99 was so much fun. I was addicted. I should get a Switch again just for Tetris 99. I've never played Super Smash Brothers. I never actually had a Nintendo console growing up. The Switch was my first, so I never had the whole... I just never really... I had a PlayStation. So, Tekken and Crash Bandicoot. They were good. They need to do like a Switch Pro or something. But anyway, alright, I'm gonna go make that coffee. It wasn't lucky. I'll be back. Okay. We'll give everyone a few minutes if they've head off to make a coffee or go. Hogwarts Legacy coming out looks good. I agree, it looks awesome. It should be good. We'll see. I don't know. Can't get excited. Is anyone playing Elden Ring? I'm obsessed. It's like, I don't get much free time. Not because, anyway, COMP1531 is a big course to teach. You can imagine there's a lot of hours goes into it. And then I got other stuff I have to do. But Elden Ring is awesome. I just think it's the best. I think it's my favorite game I've ever played. So, but I played like the Dark Souls games and things. So I was already predisposed to like it. But yeah, I'm so impressed. It's such a good game. And it looks amazing. It's just, yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, why can't you play it for long stretches? Because I think I noticed I get like a headache. I think it's like something with the frame rate or something. Is that what you meant, Tom? Or you just get frustrated? It's, I don't know. I feel like it's a bit more difficult than it's an emotional strain. Yeah, I get that. I know. I mean, I have the moments too where you just get stuck at a wall and just turn it off. I think it's a bit harder than Dark Souls like 3. Maybe. Not sure. But it's way more fun, I think. And the lore is much more, I don't know, I'm not crazy into it. Like I never, some people are like, oh, the lore is so simple. Whoops. I never really got the Dark Souls lore. I just played it and it was fun. And like you pick up little tidbits, but I feel like the Elden Ring, it's similar, but it's much more, I'm getting it for some reason. I don't know what they've changed. Yeah. But I mean, what an achievement that game is. Game developers are amazing. I worked with again where I used to work. For whatever reason, I think because there used to be an Australian game development industry, and then it got decimated. So a lot of the game developers just went off and got normal engineering jobs. And I used to work with maybe 3 ex-game developers, right? So they worked on Australian games, like sort of cool ones, but weird ones, like Don Bradman's Cricket. One of them worked on that. A lot of old Nintendo NES games way back when. Some stuff you've heard of and stuff. But yeah, the way that game developers think about coding is so different from like your classical software engineering students. The way that they optimize stuff it's the stuff I don't think about. They really know what they're doing. It's really cool. If you ever find a game developer, a good one, pick their brain on stuff. They really have a unique approach to it all. Yeah, I wonder how much George Martin actually did. I'm cautious. Also, I feel like just finish your book. But yeah, I mean, whatever influence he had, it must have been positive. Yeah, it's a great game. The last thing I'll say on it is that it's been awesome to see that between each Souls game. So I feel like each Dark Souls game got better. They improved. Then like Bloodborne was something different. Sekiro was something different. And Elden Ring just seems like the best of everything sort of combined. And they've just pulled it off so well. So good on From Software. Represent the Japanese. Good on them. Never heard of Uramangi. But Australia's made great games, Wesley. What are you talking about? What is some shit? I need an example now. Come up with some. So we made that Goose Game, Untitled Goose Game, was Australian. There's heaps. Borderlands 3, there you go. That was when we had a big Australian. Oh no, Borderlands 3 is only recent. The Sims 4? I didn't know we did The Sims. Oh no, are these just the top games in Australia? Oh, you can't see my screen. Okay, never heard of Project Windman. Golf Story I've heard of. I didn't know that was Australian. A lot of indie games. Frog Detective. Jesus, these aren't a good... What is this? Oh, Fallout Tactics. I didn't know that was Australian. I heard that was the worst Fallout game though. So that's not a good example. I feel like we have better examples than... Yeah, these are definitely not Australian games. They were just games in Australia. Or they might have just been of... Oh god. Someone help me out. I know we have Fire Monkey Studios in Australia. They're the EA. yeah, the game you made in Year 12. That's on the top of the list. I'll submit it. Jetpack Joyride. Yeah, that's I think that's EA. That's the Fire Monkey Studio. I had a friend that worked there for a while. Now he's a successful YouTuber. Some of you might know him. Oh god, I'm not doing too well. Anyway, some of you can find some stuff. Anyway, let's get back to the content. 12.13. Okay, cool. All right, so more requirement stuff, but we're talking about use cases and use stories. Some actual things that we develop in the requirements process as we go through it. Okay, slides working. Yep, all good. Okay. Requirements can be very human, but express complex flows, and we need some agreed upon way to model this. Absolutely. So how do we do that? We can write user stories, user acceptance tests, use cases, and use case representations. We've spoken about this. This takes place in the requirements analysis before design development and the testing. All right, user stories. Let's talk about them. So they're a method of requirements engineering used to inform the development process and what features to build with the users at the center. So they have a very specific structure. You've probably seen this. It actually went around as a meme. Have you seen the meme user stories? It's like, I don't know, maybe I'm just on a very specific, like, TikTok or something. But it's like, as a video game player, I want more goose games so that I can live out my fantasies of being a goose farmer, like, for example. But like some of them have been quite funny. So for example, you might be interviewing a student and the student says, I want to be able to purchase my monthly parking passes online. I don't want to have to go to the office. So your user story would be, as a student, I want to purchase a parking pass so that I can drive to school. So it's putting the information that you elicit from a user into a specific format so that when you pass it around to other people, it's obvious. Because you might interview a student, but not write down that it was a student and it wasn't a staff member, because the staff member can already do it online, for example. So they're written in non-technical language, so it's not like, as a user, I want to use a HTTP backend to blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what a user story is. It's from the user's perspective, what are the things that they want to do? And it's focused on the goal. So it's not how you do it. So it's not like I want to click a button to do the, I don't want to, forget about the system, the user interface, anything. What does the user want to do? What is their end goal? Why are they paying you why are they engaged with your system? What value are they getting out of it? And it's documenting that. The reason it's important is it separates it separates what the user wants from the solution. It says it right there. It keeps the problem focused, not solution focused. That's another good way of saying it. So it's all about letting the user's needs surface to your engineers. Let's I think the idea here is like, let's build some user story activities via the context of building a to-do list. So this is coming down to the idea that lots of different people have slightly different requirements for maybe the same system. So you need to find those different requirements. So there's some requirements, right, that you might not need to really go off and do a use. So you know the basic features of a to-do list, right? You want to be able to type the to-do and be able to tick it off. Okay, that might be something you can just write down. But then there might be other ways that people use to-do lists that you might not think of. So can some of you in the chat write, so you don't have to write it like a user story, just write some of the features or the requirements you have from a to-do list. And maybe some descriptor, are you using it in your studies? Are you using it in your work? Are you using it to stay organized? Okay, perfect. Due dates is a perfect one. Let me just open up a text editor. Whoa. It's just going to open. Go away. Super secret project. Okay, save. Let's just make a text file. User rex. Okay, whatever. Just going to save it in some random folder. All right, so I liked the first one. Where was it? Julia, okay. So, I mean, Julia, what are you... Okay, studying plus scheduling. So let's say as a student, I want to be able to set due dates in my to-do list. Now, why you didn't say why you want to set these due dates. So so Julia, why do you want due dates in your to-do list? I mean, I can intuit why, but I need to ask you. I shouldn't intuit. This is the trap, right? I know that I can understand why someone might want due dates. Time management, right? But I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe it's so that Julia, when she looks back at all of her to-do items, I don't know. Some other example. Because I'm forgetful, I need to... Okay, let's just put that down. Because otherwise I might forget and I need to know when to do things. Let's put it like this. Okay, and this is a user story. It's descripting a story of what feature someone needs and why they need it and who they are. They're the three sort of components. Who they are, what feature they need, and why they need it. Can you read that? Whoops, that one's good. Okay. And this is a nice little package. It's a really simple thing, but it's nice. All right, what are some other ones? I mean, I don't know how many. We can do one more maybe, but... so a reminder alarm, that's another good one. So again, Tom, what type of context are you using this in? Is it for your studies? Is it for your personal organization? What's it for? So you got to tell me sort of who you are, right? Personal, cool. So, okay, what do we say here? As a what? Gaming. Okay, well, as a gamer, I want to be... What was the feature now? I've forgotten. I want to be able to set reminders on my to-do items. And what was the reason? So you said, I want an alarm reminder. So this is right. So like you can tell me some information, but I need more information. So why do you want to be able to set? I think you might have said it here. Gotta make sure my energy doesn't overflow. Okay, sure. Because I want to make sure energy doesn't overflow. I mean, so this is where this might be a bit of an unclear requirement. So this is where dealing with users can get tricky. Not to say Tom's tricky, but like you might need to break this one down and say, well, what is that? What is your energy? So, yeah, you might need to break this one down further. But you're getting the idea, I think. So Atlassian has, let's rephrase that. Yeah, I agree. It's okay though. We get the idea, I think. I mean, it's a good sort of definition. Okay, I get what you mean now. Yeah. You got to hit certain, like your dailies or something like that. See, I know the terms. I played World of Warcraft. Okay. Like a lot of these things, Atlassian has some nice guides on these topics. So you can see here, persona plus need plus purpose is your user story. What a succinct way of saying it. And there's some descriptions here, how to build them, lessons learned. Some examples. That's a weird one as Max. Are these like examples of what not to do? Because a Max isn't a persona. But anyway. Oh, is that a persona statement? No, it's a user story. Anyway. How do you have an understanding of who Max is? We've interviewed plenty of Maxes. Maybe I didn't read this properly. And this is like, no, what not to do. Like, I get this one. As a manager, that's what I thought they were more like. I've not seen. But maybe if you've already described who Max is, then it's okay. So you could be like, Max is our power user who really likes to use all the features of the app. That's a persona. Anyway, it's a good article other than that little thing. All right. Yep. Open to that link. So how do we know that we've, met the user story requirement? So here's a little activity here called invest. The user story could be developed independently and delivered separately. So someone else develops the user stories to separate yourself from the execution of it. They should be negotiable, avoid too much detail. You don't want to go way too specific because then you start to solve overly specific problems and you might get stuck in this scope situation where you're building out, you can imagine, right? So for example, in our example, the reason Tom actually wanted the reminders was because so that I can hit my in-game timers, right? The timers being like, so there's some game that this gamer has to log into every week or every day to do, and the reminders so that they don't miss it, okay? If I get too specific, I might, as an engineer, say, well, why don't we dynamically use an API from the game to go into the game and get the in-game data, and we'll pre-schedule the reminders for the gamer because the gamer wants to do this, so that they don't even need to put the daily reminders in it. It's just automatically in there. How cool would that be? And so you spend 3 months building this hook feature. It's a cool feature, and Tom, this gamer, it's like, oh, this is awesome. Like, this pulled out my, I don't know, what's the game? Genshin Impact daily timers. Does Genshin Impact have dailies? I'm sure it does. It pulled out the timers for me, and it's put it in my to-do list. Like, this is the best thing ever. And then 99% of the other users are like, why can't I edit my to-do list? Because we spent all this effort building this feature that serves only 1% of the users. Does that make sense? You want to serve 99% of the users with most of your effort. Unless you're making a really specific app where, this is what all you want to do. It was Genshin Impact, yeah. Cool. But does that little anecdote about being hyper-specific make sense? Okay, again, you really, one of the, I don't know how to say your name. It's Tejas or something. But really pissed off about their Apple wheels, the 600 USD wheels. It must serve a 1%, I guess, right? It mustn't be 0. But it's like you're really angry about. It's funny. All right, it must be valuable. That's obvious, right? Like it's gotta serve some value to the client. There's no point building something that the client doesn't actually want. It's got to be estimable. So like, you can't say we're gonna build this massive thing and we have no idea when it's going to be due. Yeah, someone's got a vendetta for sure. User stories should be small. Absolutely. You don't want like this massively detailed thing that's too hard to get your head around. And it should be testable. This is a big one. So after I build the feature, I should be able to say, does my feature or does this app solve what this student persona wanted or what this gamer use case wanted? Excuse me. Okay, user acceptance criteria. So break down a user story into criteria that must be met for a user or a customer to accept. This is really important stuff. Again, we write it in natural language because it's something we want to sort of take back to the user, and it can be refined before the implementation. So basically what the idea is that you take your user story that we just wrote and you derive from it the actual criteria that should, in theory, if it's implemented, meet the requirements of the user story. So here's an example. As a user, I want to use a search field to type a city name or street so that I can find matching hotel options. So there's some user story that we have here. You might argue that it's not a great user story because it's a bit specific, like to use a search field, for example. That's a bit weird. But it might, like a better user story would just be like, as a user, I want to search for, a city so that I can find matching hotel options. Let's say that. So then you got to say, well, okay, we've got this user story. We know it's a common problem, blah, blah, blah. How do we create, the solution that fulfills this problem? So, well, we need a search bar. Okay. The search bar needs to work. How does the search bar work? Well, we might say this is where like a lot of things that we just automatically know because we use search bars all the time. But we need to think about it. So once the user starts clicking on it and typing, it starts the search. The search might be dynamic. Here's the default content. Here's the placeholder. Here's when we know what to search. Here's some limitations to it, right? So it's building out the requirements, the criterion for a specific use story. I can see you're all talking about something else. I'll address it in a second. Okay. They should not be too broad. They want to be something that you can build. They shouldn't be too narrow either. You don't want to have too many technical details in it. So again, it's not like the user search needs to send a HTTP GET, like that's an implementation detail, not a criteria. But they can be a bit more technical than the user story itself. But they should still be understandable by the client. So a client's going to understand that I want a search field, but they might not understand that you want a HTTP request. And they should be updated. They can be updated during development as things, naturally progress. But in theory, you want them mostly developed before the project starts. All right, so why don't we write some criterion for these two features? Before we do that, let me read the chat. Okay, TZ, you've spawned a whole thing. So if a team member has like 4 commits across iteration 1 and 2, will they be getting a 0? My tutor said that everyone will get the same mark in one team. That's not true, Steve. We do individual scaling, so yeah, we give individual marks if necessary. A tutor can change your individual mark. Yep, that's with the scaling. But anyway, this is just email me. Don't talk about this in the chat. Yeah, so anyway, short of it is write it in the peer review, let your tutor know, and if you're not sort of happy with how it's going, just email me. Some of you have already done this, and hopefully you found that, I don't know, if you did email me about something, hopefully you found that we adjusted and responded to it pretty well. What's TZ saying? So Steve is just saying that's how teams go. To an extent, that's true, but yeah. Okay, I was saying courses with group projects are excluded from WAM calculation. Again, guys, I mean, I don't know, some of you would have had this, but we give individual marks. And especially for iteration 2 and 3, the scaling can be a bit more significant than iteration 1. So you get an individual mark. Okay, anyway, let's change the topic. Alrighty. So let's write some criteria for these user stories. So as a student, I want to be able to set due dates on my to-do list. So how do you set a due date in a to-do list? Well, there might need to be a date picker, next to the item. What are some other criteria that we will need to document to be able to build this due date feature? Okay, you're all still on the peer review stuff. Yeah. So if you just leave the last part blank, Julia, the last few. If you're in a team of 4, you don't do the 5th, and if you're in a team of 5, you don't do the 6th, whatever. Anyway, TZ, you should email me. I think you might have actually. Did you already email me? I have a feeling you might have. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I thought I gave you a pretty detailed response. I know you're frustrated. I know it is frustrating. Group projects can be frustrating. I had it too in my own group projects. They're tricky. They're tricky beasts. They're tricky beasts to design courses for, from my perspective. Because one of the learning outcomes of the course and the program is that you have group projects. So it's tricky to make them fair. We do our best. But also the last thing I'll say on this is that absolutely, Steve's right. I know it's frustrating, but at the end of the day, it's all about what you learn and what you do. The other thing is that it's not always clear what's going on with other people. So I know it might be frustrating, but try have a bit of compassion. You don't know if the person in your group has special considerations or an ELS or has something going on in their personal lives, especially during the last few years. It's been, there's been COVID, there's been floods, there's been issues, I don't need to keep going. So you don't always know what's going on with other people. So you got to keep that in mind. But let's just focus on, let's get through this content and then we'll come back to talk about it. Does that sound good? Because people who are watching the video might get annoyed that we're not focusing on the content in the lectures. So hopefully that's reasonable. So please, what's some other, so if we're building a due date picker for the to-do list, what are some of the criteria that we might need to write down? So I've already said one, there needs to be a date picker. So we need some way to pick the date. So we don't need to go into any more details on that. We don't need to say how the date picker is implemented, but we want to say that, okay, there is a date picker. So what's another feature, or what's another set of criteria when we're developing this date picker due date feature? Yeah, no worries. Email me. But come on, let's get some of these out. Organized by nearest date. Okay, I like it. So this is like, okay, so I was thinking about it like, how do you set the date? Which is, okay, this is a good point, because the user story is, I want to be able to set the due dates. The sorting, I guess it's, maybe let's put like a little separator here. So once a due date is set, there should be an option, maybe an optional should always just do it, to sort the items by the approaching due date. Is that what you're saying? I like that. That's a good point. You could argue that this is a separate feature, maybe even a separate user story than setting it. Because maybe someone wants to set it, but they don't want it sorted that way, for example. But it's close enough that we can include it. So maybe something that you guys we need to think about is like the time zone. So what time zone does it need to be in, for example? Oh, that's a great one. That's a good one, Echoic. Date picker should only show future dates. I hate when you use any date picking app and like you click the date and it like defaults to some random date in the past. Like, okay, maybe sometimes you're picking a date in the past, but like, I don't know. It's hard to do right, but like at least try and get me close, which is what this feature is about. So this is a nice thing to think about. So to-do list items should be visual or shown in some form of timeline. So again, this is similar to, like, we want to focus specifically on this user story, and this user story is setting the due date. That's what the user told us they wanted. They didn't tell us that they wanted it to be sorted some way or anything like that. So we want to focus, really hyper focus on setting the due date. There's probably not too much to it. So there needs to be a date picker. The date picker should only show future dates. I like that one. Maybe like when I select a date, it should be displayed next to the item, right? Show me the date. Don't just let me pick it and then not show it, because then I can't go back to it and see when it's due. So you can see that even though it's a really simple feature, there's a lot of different things. Yeah, that's another great one. Echoic, you're smashing it. Should I show the specific time? Now, I might say, or I guess you're saying like, pick the specific time. Maybe it's optional. But this is where, like, this is a good question now. Like, I don't really know what it should be. Should it show a time? Does the user actually care about that type of granularity? I might need to now go back to the user and ask, do you need to set the specific time? I didn't actually ask you that. And Julia's saying, well, just make it a toggleable option, right? But then the thing is, like, you're putting some engineering effort and some design and some clutter into a feature that might just never be used. So maybe it's better to ask. And a reminder when it's approaching. Again, that's not really, I mean, it's a good feature, right? You probably need it, but it's not specific to setting the due date. So we want to make sure that would be a different feature, a different user story, Chelsea. But anyway, it's a great point. So I think you're getting the idea now, right? What I want you to understand is that sometimes we come up with this criteria and then we need to think, is this actually belonging here? Maybe we need to go back and ask. Okay, did we speak about these? I think we did. Minimize technical detail, yep. And they should have written before it starts. Okay, so now we've come up with our criteria. And we need to, test that once we've built a system, or come up with, we haven't built the system. What we're doing next is we've developed our criteria and we're coming up with tests. So think of like test-driven development, but like for the criteria. That we can perform once the system is built, that will indicate to us whether or not we solved the particular problem and we met the requirements of the criteria. So they're tests that are performed to ensure that acceptance criteria have been met. Not all acceptance criteria can easily be mapped to automated acceptance tests. That's fine. And they should be black box tests. All right, let's get some examples. So here's a user story. As a user, I can log in through a social media account because I always forget my passwords. And specifically, we want to be able to log in through Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So the acceptance criteria, are we going to get into an example of it? No, this is... okay, so I suppose this is... okay, I'll just finish on this slide. I thought there was more slides on it coming up. But... or maybe they will in a bit. But basically, we want to come up with some implementable tests that can, so it's like you want to document the things that you want to be able to do with the system so that once you've built it, you can run through your tests and see that the thing that you built solves this problem. That's basically what the testing idea is. Okay, here's another, so we went through this, another example. These are often referred to as rule-based acceptance criteria. So the acceptance criteria we've been developing are rule-based. But sometimes it's preferable to have acceptance criteria that describe a scenario. This is the given, when, and then format. So given some precondition, when I do some action, I expect a result. So let's have an example of that. So this is another format of our acceptance criteria. So here we have the user story. Like always, we start with these. As a user story, I want to be able to recover the password to my account so that I will be able to access my account in case I forget the password. Okay, so we want a password recovery feature. So this is a scenario-driven acceptance criteria. So in the scenario that I forgot my password, given that the user's on the login page, right, so we can't do this anywhere else, when the user selects that they forgot their password, and they enter a valid email so they remember the email that they used to sign up. Then we want the system to send out a link to that email account, and then we can sort of go back. Given that they receive and access that link, when they navigate through it, they can set a new password. So this is like a user flow, I think is another term, like a scenario flow or something. That's used to describe scenarios, but again, it's derived from the user story. So how do you know which one you should use, the rule-based one or the scenario-based ones? The rule-based acceptance criteria are really simple, and they work for all sorts of stories. I think these are good for like your general basic features, right? But when you've got sort of more specific maybe uncommon, right, situations or scenarios, that's when you might need to go into a bit of detail describing the full scenario. So like, one of the default features of this system might be to pick the due date. But, what to do when a user forgets their password, it's a common occurrence, sure, but it's a scenario that you need to map out because you can't just automatically arrive at that situation. You had to forget your password, you had to have already signed up, and etc., etc., etc. But the good thing about scenario-based acceptance criteria is that they're really testable. If you go back to the previous example here, you can imagine that this scenario is like basically describing a test. I can sit someone down and say, let's say you could just set up an account for them, not tell them the password, and say, okay, we want you to recover your password. Here's the email account that you used to sign up. Can you sit through our user interface and get your password recovered? And if they're able to do it with these steps, then you've met the requirement that you set out to develop. So these are really simple to turn into tests. Again, if you look at the other examples, let's see. Where are the criteria? Well, we can look at the ones that... oh, here it is, here. When we look at this example, it's not really describing a flow. So it's not really describing something that's a test. It doesn't say like the user should click on this and start typing this, and then they should see this result, and then they can click on this to get that. It's just describing more like things that should be included in the system. That's why the scenario-based acceptance criteria are naturally a bit more testable. So you'd have to maybe do a bit of extra work to come up with tests for your rule-based acceptance criteria. Is that making some sense? Now, I know you might be looking at these and thinking, this is so obvious. Like, why do I need to document that I need a search bar for a user to search? Is that things that some of you are thinking? Or what are your natural sort of, where you are going to with some of this information? Nope. You've all checked out. You're all, come on. What's your, how's it sitting with you, this stuff? All right, let me paste these in the... Is this link correct? Oh, what a weird link. Okay. Okay, making sense. I gotta fix these links up. Oh, it's too long to send. Okay. So I gotta send them individually. Oops. Yeah, I think that's what I was sort of alluding to, Tom, is that they don't seem, they don't seem out there. It's a good way of saying it. But I think, these are really simple examples. So first of all, that's part of the problem. They don't seem that useful. But really, so this was I think this, when we came up with this specific time thing, I think that really illuminates how important this process is. I literally didn't think about whether or not we need this feature. And you can imagine that, okay, adding the feature of a specific time is not going to take much engineering effort, right? So you could argue that, this is probably over-engineering the requirements gathering for this particular feature. Sure. But if this was a massive feature and these items were months of work, maybe a year of work, think of the money that would cost, a year of engineering salary and office space and everything that goes along with that. You want to really make sure that you spend that money building the right thing. Another way to think of this is that imagine it was your money. Imagine you were the founder of this software company. Even picking a specific time, it's still, a few days of a developer's work. Then they've got to write unit tests, and then they've got to check the database is storing the time in the correct format. And then you can imagine, it really does add up. So you want to make sure that you discover everything. And also another way to think about it is that I might forget about this. So let's say I completely forgot about it. I went off, I got my requirements engineer got the requirements from the user, gave it to the developer. The developer spent, let's say, a month building this entire system. They deliver it, they go on to the next project, behind the scenes. Meanwhile, you come back to your client and you show off the tool, and they're like, oh, I can't pick the time, right? Oh, you didn't tell me you wanted to pick the time. I forgot about it. All right. Now I need to pull a developer off another team to come back to another code base. The code base could be a different system in a different language. The developer's got to now, has some overheads where they've got to switch. You'll all face this yourselves, right? Cognitive overheads when you're switching projects. You probably find it a lot with when you switch courses, right? So you do 1531, you're doing Python, you're doing Flask, you're doing HTTP. Then you've got another course that's in a different language. It's a completely different thing. So now you've got to pay time for your developer who's now not working on that other project. You're paying them to switch over their thinking. They add the time thing. Yes, it doesn't take them long, but can you see how it's like the cost of it is bigger than just the time spent on developing this feature. Now the other project might fall behind because they were right at their deadline. So that's why it really is important to go through this process, especially as the scope of the projects are getting larger. Okay, further reading, I already sent the links. There's 8 minutes left in the lecture, and there's a few more slides. So the use cases, use cases, I think, okay, we'll get through use cases, but there's time to talk about them tomorrow, I think, as well. But anyway, use cases represent a dialogue between the user and the system with the aim of helping the user achieve a business goal. So the user initiates actions with the system and the system responds with reactions. They're considering the system as being black box. That's really important. And they're only focused on the high level understanding of flow. There's a range of different approaches to developing these, but generally you can have lists of informal steps. So just things that the user does and how the system responds. Or this is how I mostly have seen these, is that they're diagrammatic. Do we have an example here? Okay, this is a weird example. This isn't what I meant by diagram. It sort of just describes the actions that the user takes. So the user says, enter your PIN. The system displays enter your PIN. The user then enters the PIN. The system then verifies the PIN, checks with another server. Maybe you don't even visualize that, and then the user gets their response back. But okay, so here's a written form. I just wanted to see if there was a diagram form. So written use case form. So the ATM displays enter your PIN, the customer enters the PIN. With that PIN, what does the ATM do? It asks the bank to verify the PIN. Okay, then the bank, you go through all the different sort of features, but you're documenting what your user is responsible for doing, and what your system is responsible for doing. What else? Really, use case diagrams. Yeah, these are, God, I've made so many of these, giving me flashbacks. Does Atlassian have any examples? This is probably fine. No, I don't want a marketplace. I just want some examples. Okay, these are technical UML diagrams. Okay, well, this was a good one here. I don't know how clear this is as a diagram, but the way that these models are displayed is on the edges. There is a divider here. I don't know how clearly you can see it. But on the left, you have your humans, your users. I guess it doesn't have to be humans, right? It could be animals, for example. But typically, you've got your users. And in the box, you have your system. And so it's black box in that you don't know exactly what the system's doing. You're just saying that this is a really messy one. But so the client orders food to the system, like maybe through the waiter to the POS. And then that order goes to the chef who then cooks the food. So they don't even have to be software systems. They can be technical systems, or in this case, the system is also the kitchen. So I know that was a bit of a weird example. Or they can be in written form like this. So it's just documenting what things are required that the user does or interacts with, and what things are the system doing. Okay, I'm going to be honest as well, with a lot of these things now, back when waterfall was the predominant software development lifecycle model, more time was spent on the requirements gathering and the development of these sort of more detailed use cases. In my experience now, I don't think, unless you go to a very specific place, you're really not going to be developing these UML diagrams anymore. Maybe there's another team that's responsible for it. I think it does still happen on really big projects. I've not really worked on really big projects where you've got companies with enough scale to hire people where this is what they do. But with agile development, the industry has been pushing towards getting time spent on doing the things that matter most for the user. And that typically just means building MVPs, minimum viable products, and delivering them. So a lot of these, it's important to know about these things. The history of software development, these played an important role. Typically, these don't really happen much anymore. That's why a lot of these diagrams are looking quite outdated. They used to happen a lot more. But anyway, it's still important to think about them. Did I skip through? Okay, yeah, that was the written form. Okay. So this is listing some of the sort of terms associated with the use case. So for example, in the use case that you're withdrawing money, what's the goal? Your customers need to withdraw money from their accounts without going into the bank. So they want to use an ATM. So it's important to document, why do we need an ATM at all? So what's the scope? What systems are involved here? Well, the ATM and the banking infrastructure, so like the server. Is this a primary task? Is this a, for example, if the user forgot their PIN, that might be a secondary task, right? It's not the thing that the user's always doing. What are the preconditions? So they already have an account. If this was forgetting the password, they already have an account and they forgot the password, for example. What happens if the user successfully completes this task? They get their money, for example, or they get their password reset. What are the failure conditions? Maybe they forgot their PIN in this first example, then they don't get their money. Who is the actor? It's the customer. It's not the bank teller. It's not the bank manager. It's the customer. What's the trigger? They put the card in the ATM. So it's describing all the details and the background surrounding why the user's coming into this example. And here's a template that is commonly used for developing these backgrounds. But again, where you work, if you're doing these sort of activities, what happens is that your company will already have its own templates that it has found work best. And it might not be this at all. It could be just, we only do, so user stories are really common. They still happen. So it might just be user stories and a few things in a requirements document, but it might not be this specific format. So a lot of this stuff is conceptual. It's a bit historical. It's what the industry used to do. Knowing these basic concepts is really important so that you can discuss it and figure out, why it's useful. And then when you go to work at a company, it's software industry is such a big field now. So every company is doing different things depending on the scope of the systems that they're developing. So you basically pick up what your company's, doing, and you go ahead with that because they've learned, what works for them and what doesn't work for them. You can use these models to describe really specific situations, such as, what happens if there's insufficient funds. And if you're curious about this stuff, there's a lot more details on use cases at a few of these links. So I think Alistair here has there you go. This is a highly influential paper on, how to write useful use cases. But this is all sort of, you don't need to go off and read these things for 1531. It's just if you're interested, which I'm not sure how many of you will be, but maybe some of you. But I know Alistair is a bit of a thought leader in this space. And I think that's it. Okay, monorail requirements, optional. We're out of time anyway. It's 1 p.m. But we can build, like the activity is just to build out a monorail for UNSW, which would be a fun activity actually. Maybe that would be a good one for the tutorials. Okay, that's all the lecture content. Once again, I will get the whatever. Don't tell me I've lost it. Oh, and I need a white background. So I'll answer some questions while this is here. Jack, would you say, okay, it's a question. Would you say you should do the minimum amount of requirement research documentation to start an MVP and then get into that? Okay, it's not that I'm saying this is what you should do. It completely depends on your company. But what's happened is, as an industry, for right or for wrong, some people think for wrong, including the guy that's attributed with developing Agile himself. I can't remember his name. Can anyone help me here? There was someone, I don't know what I'm even trying to say. The guy I thought there was one guy that was like a big proponent behind Agile, and he himself has recently come out and said that he doesn't think Agile works very well. So it's not that Agile is good or bad. The point is that the industry has moved towards Agile. And what that means is that the method, the thesis behind Agile is that you want to spend your developer time on what's most important for the client. And what that typically, I guess the argument is that what's most important for the client isn't, hundreds of requirements documents, it's an app. So naturally, the industry has moved away from these requirements. I actually feel like we're going to have a pushback. Like all things, the world is cyclical, and I think I've always worked in Agile because, like, by the time I went out into industry, Agile was like the huge. I mean, there were entire businesses where their entire job was consulting for software companies on how to be more agile, which is sort of crazy, but whatever. I guess it makes sense. And I feel like there's a lot of things we do in Agile that's also wasted because we didn't just spend a couple of weeks before we got started doing some requirements analysis. Now, maybe some other companies do Agile better than we did, sure. But typically the industry's moved away from UML diagrams and use case diagrams and things like that. We still do requirements gathering. It might be another team that before you get your developers on board, they go out and they meet the client, they meet the user, they might do some focus groups, they might do some users interviews, they might look at some statistics. But in general, more time is now spent on the actual development and a bit less time is spent on really thorough requirements analysis. But it's not like I'm saying that should be the case. It's just what I've seen. Does the monorail slide work? It might not. Oh, it's an ARC site, so maybe it's gone. Yeah. Ooh. Oh, should I risk it? Sure. Okay, I don't know what this is. I can't tell if it's a joke or if it's... I don't know, it's just trying to make me log in. Sorry about that. Is this real? Was there really a 2012 bid for a monorail at UNSW? Oh my God, to connect to the lower, middle and upper campus. I don't know if this was like a joke. I don't get the context of it. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming to the lecture, for working so hard on iteration 2. You're all doing amazing work. It's all worth it, I promise. Last thing I'll say on the iteration stuff, if you've got any things that are eating at you and you don't think it's fair or something like that, you just need to reach out, send me an email. I think we're really reasonable and all the tutors are on your side. I'm on your side. So reach out if you've got any issues, but group projects, this is sort of, to an extent, what they're like. They're a lot of work for certain people, but you got to just keep in mind that you do get the most out of it. So Anyway, that's a bit of perspective. But thank you again so much. You're all doing amazing. I'll see you tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Have a great day. Thank you, guys.